And thank you for bearing with us. The chat room, as I said, you folks are the backstage pass, and you get to see all the wires dangling from the ceiling as a result of this. Let's open the show with a meditation. It's probably a good place for us all to start, to recenter the energies. And so if you can, just get comfortable in your chair, straighten your back. Let's start with a nice deep breathing. And I want you to visualize your breath as light, because it is. It is the prana, the chi, the pneuma, the spirit, the creative spirit, the spirit that danced upon the waters once long ago upon the creation of this earth, when the entities known as humans were in primordial state. And breathe in as you're doing that. Just feel your breath as light, and take it down to your root chakra, and then bring it back up again. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Just feel the calm energies emanating right now. Each one of you are elements and agents of photonic energy streaming in and out of the universe. You each are beacons of light. And as you'll learn in the receiver's message, which we're going to do after the first segment tonight, there's far more to it than this. The secret of light is being unveiled on this world right now, and it's occurring because of the darkness. Once in one of the earlier receiver shows, we talked about the fact that people go out at night and look at the sky, and when you go out at night, you don't go out to look at the dark. The dark is what makes the light evident. Light shines through darkness, and it overcomes it. And it does not know, because it is an unknowing force, and yet it is itself the antithesis of light. It also creates the contrast by which we, in our physical reality, construct our physical reality. Isn't that kind of weird? So, on board tonight for this show, we have with us in the first segment, and this will go however it goes, probably do 45 minutes on each side. We have from Ireland, the Emerald Isles, the land of the deep Celts mysteries. Our friend WolfAmos is with us, and I know he's got some things he wants to talk about. Second hour, second segment. I don't like using hours anymore because it's become imprecise. We will have with us the girls from the Gold Pill podcast, Meredith and Amy, will be joining us. Meredith does astrology. Amy is quite a proficient commentator on the social construct, which we all have to deal with and navigate as well. And so let's bring in our friend, WolfAmos. Can we see you? Are we going to be able to? Yeah, there we go. Difficult setup he's got going on there. All right, brother. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to us wherever we are from where you are in Ireland.
Good evening, Randy. Good evening from cyberspace in Ireland.
The vagaries of the digital world. Yeah.
And yeah, with a lovely time of year again. We're here finally in the midst of the winter, looking back towards the spring.
Mm-hmm.
It's a blessed feeling, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah.
It is a blessed feeling. And it was interesting today because it didn't feel like a midwinter. It was very mild. The temperature was lovely. We had a very hard frost there for a little while, but today just felt that little bit of spring already. It was unusual for the time of year.
You know, it's funny because here on the East Coast of the United States, it was, I wouldn't say warm, but it was warmer than it's been, and it was drier than it's been, at least here in southern central Pennsylvania. And I walked outside this afternoon. The sky was crystal clear. The sun was shining. And it feels like the calm before the storm, because I guess we're supposed to be blasted by weather this weekend, whether it's geoengineered or natural, I don't know. I mean, the media is using weather now as another weapon against us. They weaponized weather and they're using it in psychological warfare. So you're supposed to be afraid of nature and weather. But yeah, today was one of those luminescent, beautiful days here, and hopefully it was wherever you all were. A reminder again of the beauty of the sun and its place in our firmament and in our hearts and in our DNA.
It's strange because we have a saying in Ireland that it's not the weather that's wrong, it's just the clothing that you wear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. It must be the point in time where people are back looking towards something as simple as, let's say, astronomy and astrology, because that's when we discussed doing a show the other day. I kind of going through notes, and I know you were saying it'd be really nice if we keep on that very similar sort of vein about mythology and also about the time of year. And I find this time of year always an inspiration, and I think this one no less. Something dawned on me very recently about the grand. Do you remember we sort of went through the cycles of the 200-year and the 20-year cycles of Jupiter and Saturn, and I think in this last year I've been very retrospective. So that was what I'd like to bring up today, is just a little sort of expose of some of the astrology and astronomy that I've moved back into after giving up for many years, and think something that I'd like to share with you, which would be great.
Absolutely. And I think it's time
poetry.
for astrology and astronomy to be brought back together and joined as one art, one science, because that's originally the way it began.
Yeah, the movements of the heavens is the great luminaries.
Yeah.
And you see the flat Earth, globe Earth thing is it, again, we talked very briefly, but you actually inspired me to think again about that, because obviously I'm a bit of a globe-tard. But, I'd never left it off the table that maybe we live on a big, very, very odd-shaped planet. This is something I did wonder about, the sort of oscillation of the planet. It doesn't have to be, we've rationalized it with this idea of a globe. But it might be that, the luminaries are going around a very, very, very sort of, how would you put it, an aperture within a very much larger body of Earth that we don't see, but there is it's itself tumbling through space in the same kind of fashion, but it doesn't have to be round. In fact, when I was studying Jupiter, and Saturn isn't round, but Saturn is a very strange shape. So we are at a time now where we don't know what to believe. We cannot believe anything, actually. That's one of the strangest things about this time, isn't it? They've made it so that reality is so questionable on so many levels. But I wonder if that's part of the movement again of what we're doing as human beings. I think we're having to disbelieve reality to really get a handle on what reality is.
I said this years ago when the whole flat Earth movement came out, that at the time I didn't completely agree with it. That said, I admired greatly some of the people who came forward with their theories and their ideas, because they sort of cracked open the whole conversation about the construct and what it really is. And this is part of the time that we're in right now, is this questioning, and this questioning leads us to re-examine the views that we've held, flat Earth versus round Earth. Well, I came to the conclusion, or perhaps not the conclusion, but at least the premise that, well, what if it's not either? What if it's not either, or what if it's both? What if, and this is kind of what I see when I go and I examine this, that we live inside of a vortex, that we live inside of an oscillating vortex that creates a 3 and 4 dimensional realm that has the aspects of both flat and round within it, that there's a spheroid, and yet at the same time, there is this concept of something that you would call flat Earth, but it's not entirely an accurate term, I don't think.
Suppose, I mean, when I give up the occult practices, or at least being on the fringes of things like rune reading and tarot, one of the things that had to drop away was things like astrology and astronomy, because, as it says in the Bible, that these are really very manifest of sorcery. But I couldn't, because I'm a gardener and because a natural faith healer, you cannot get led away from the natural cycle of the moon. And of course, as a gardener, you can't get past the natural cycle of the sun. So it's sort of like a gateway drug to they have to sort of observe these two luminaries every month and every year.
Yeah.
Well, when we did the Grand Conjunction show, and I realized that there is a long haul 20-year and 200-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn, all of a sudden it dawned on me that the very nature of it, when you study how it works, or why we haven't seen it actually for a few hundred years, funnily enough, because it was in front of the sun. And I looked at that concept, and then all of a sudden we're having it revealed those couple of years ago in the sky for the first time, after 400 years of having a telescope, but not being able to see it. And so it dawned on it, sat with me quite clearly, then how relevant are these two planets in our conscious understanding of our world? And so again, you scratch the surface into things like Kabbalah, and you see that the path of Has-Satan is the path of the planet Saturn. And of course, Saturn, with its 28.5-year transit, it really, really confronts the human consciousness at 28.5 years old, because it's in the same position as when you're born. Essentially, it confronts you with a reality check. And I question whether this is actually the Saturn return of the Earth, because at the moment we're going through that confrontation, we're going through that dissolving of what we believe, so that we can perhaps rebirth into newer concepts, better understanding. So this is like the human being's great Saturn return on one level. I see that very clearly at the moment about the human being.
Yeah, and as somebody that's gone through a Saturn return, I can tell you it's turbulent, it's difficult, it's painful. And at the same time, if you persevere through it, it's what I guess theologians have called the dark night of the soul. If you persevere through it, growth is tremendous. And I really do see that as kind of where we're at as a world and as humanity right now.
Absolutely. I mean, the energy of Saturn is this contractive, it's very much on the level with militarism, with control, with the ability to sort of envelope and encompass. And isn't that what the communist movement is that we're looking at the moment? They want everybody under the umbrella and dragged underneath this system. And it's a product of time. For a long while, I would have been afraid of some of the mechanisms of these elites. But on another level, I always remembered they were surfing something. There was, and over time, I've realized they're surfing not just the solar cycle, like we all do as farmers, the elite at the end of the day are farmers, the lunar cycle, which of course, again, we use to sow seeds, and every farmer knows that equation. And so it only takes a little bit of imagination to realize that those in the know, they see that Saturn of the earth and the Saturn of the soul. But it asks another question, and this is what I came to. I realized that what's the path of Jupiter, which is its counterpart.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about the path of Hasatan and this movement into contraction and reduction, if you like, of liberty. But then you've got the transit, which is much quicker, 12 and a half years in its cycle, catching up Saturn in different ways at different points in both their progressions around whatever sun model that we decide on, whether it's global or cyclic. And I think that's what I was coming to earlier. I realize now that it doesn't matter if it's a globe, it's that it's cyclic. And I think this is maybe something that part of the move away from occult practice into practical non-occult practice, and it's purely on being observational. Over the years, people have asked me what kind of faith, or these sorts of things, and having a history in Jewry and Druid and Jewish and Freemasonic and Satanic, all of these things that I've discarded, I realized that I'm the witness. That's what I've decided that we are actually here to do as a species. It's just purely to witness and observe. And part of that observation, of course, is the simplicity of the cycles. And the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn, I am starting to question whether they are literally the ascending and descending natures of what they call Kabbalah.
What if they're the two witnesses of revelation?
I think so. I think they have. These are the problems with the way metaphors are written.
Right.
On one level, it's very definite and matter of fact. But you have to put a little artistic license in there to allow those to manifest, those ideas around concepts like, and I mean, I got that recently, the books of Enoch, and I'll give you a very small line out of it after a while, but that's a fascinating book on how they perceive the transits of the planets in those ages. And I'm sure if it was tracked clearly, which I plan to do, we'll find a lot of truth. A lot of truth in those metaphors or in those words. Yeah, very interesting movement into the new world is understanding how we are cycling through this life. I find a lot of solace, especially for young people. I look at the young people and I say to myself, they're going through, and Gen Z and Gen X, they're coming through, and some of the very technologically minded, but so technologically minded, they're missing some of these very simple templates. And I think this is part of my mission on the planet right now, is to bring about a better appreciation for the elements, simplistically, and also the way in which the cycles of the planets and how they affect us. And so, as I say, Jupiter's very expansive, it's very creative. And so I've this year taken a movement to not just witness the sun and the moon as a farmer, but also to take witness of where Jupiter and Saturn is. And this year I'm going to spend a little time, I'm going to map it through the year and look at the days when I felt creative and look at other days when I didn't feel creative, when I was feeling more dogmatic, and look to see where their positions are. And I'm going to try to do that as a meditation this year.
Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting. All of our constructions, our physical constructions and understandings are based on the observations we make in the physical. And this is I guess my mission, my work has been to redirect into the inner world, into the inner landscapes, into the universe, the sun, the secret sun that lives within us. This is going to be part of the message you're going to get from the receivers tonight, is to redirect into the inner works and realize that we are kind of a feedback loop in some sense, in terms of how it looks like your camera's doing a countdown on you there. Of how we're kind of an interface between two realms, one which is physical and one which is internal, inner, the inner landscapes. And that everything that we're mapping externally is a projection of the inner landscapes. We're literally creating from the raw material, the photonic material, the thought matter, in order to expansively create an entire reality construct, the universe as what we call it. So that what we see in the external is a projection of the internal world, the inner world. And, it's a sophisticated concept because most people don't work with their own inner landscapes. People who meditate do, people who have done some sort of mystical art or experience kind of understand this. This is, even the people that did plant medicine or, other entheogens or the psychedelics back in the 60s, you may have gotten an inner glimpse of this because of what you saw when the scenery drops, when you really are walking around backstage on the universe. I mean, think about that for a minute. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? And it, again, we kind of challenge the major narratives that we've been given. I mean, even the concept of Galileo and this whole, what we see around us as globes, well, there's a couple of things. First off, almost everything that we view through the lens of a round lens. It's either a microscope, a telescope, or the cornea of the eye. We view a world which is constructed as an orb. And so I don't think that's by accident. That's divine providence. That's part of it. But it convolutes our perception on one level in that we are not able to expansively unpack the other 6 or however many dimensions there are in this construct. And astrologically, we're able to do this because there's movements, there's transits, there's all this movement through the houses. And if you look at the ephemeris that's used in astrology, you have these amazing diagrams of how things are moving around, which I find extremely interesting, even though I don't understand a lot of it.
Yeah, no, the inner light that projects is something that reflects back, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
One could argue that we are actually narcissistic in some ways because we do view the world through a lens of our own, sometimes sorrow, but also sometimes, from our own joyful perspectives. But we often reflect it back at what we ourselves might be transiting through. When you like somebody, it's that same concept. But also, as a human being, as a healer, funnily enough, when you meet somebody, I find it very ironic. Somebody was asking me the other day, how do I do my thing? And it's so difficult to actually put it into words. But the one thing I would say is that within a very, very short period of time, they tell me exactly what the problem is. And it's very, very definite. It doesn't have there's no boundary. It's immediately within the conversation, within the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, the actual solution and actual the problem will all come out in the same sentence, as though the person has that. Yeah. But I think it's that same ideology that maybe we reflect out and see back what we need to see constantly as a filter, but also as a healing mechanism for the human soul. It's like and a few people can look perhaps a little bit past that and see other people's complexes. And then some people can see again into the higher levels of a greater picture, how things are moving in the society. So I think it is perspective, and that perspective, it must be quite interesting being a member of the elite and actually having control over masses of people and having that effect happen to you with your own transit through this world. How you see a society moving and how that affects the inner self. That must be tumultuous for some elite, some people in power. Some take it with some nobility and recognize that movement and the nobility of power, because it is something that they have to sit with some nights and realize the importance of their decision making. And I don't think they're, especially some of the Freemasonic lodges that I was involved with, astrology and astronomy, were taught as a child. Like I was taught as a child. I wasn't even a lodge member. Just being in those family areas and hearing their conversations was enough to sort of realize how serious they took it. Which, yeah, no, it is. It's
what we call these are cheat codes for the construct. In a sense, they're tools, which if you look at the Masonic emblem, what do you have? You have the this
compass. Yes.
Yeah, the compass.
The compass.
Yeah. And what do you measure with a compass? Well, among other things, you can measure a transit. So, the tools, the apron, the implements of the craft within especially Masonic societies, they all have occult meanings. They all have double meanings. And those double meanings are both light and dark. As for the burden these people carry, again, they serve also the purpose of light, because it is the secret societies which kept alive the scant little knowledge that we presently hold in this world in times of darkness. Their role originally was to hold the secrets in confidence for a time when humanity was ready again to be illuminated. And instead, what happened was they were corrupted by power and co-opted by, we'll just say, certain off-world influences as well, and used for the other purposes. So we tend to think of people who practice in the occult as being dark practitioners, when in fact at one time they were the vanguard. They were the keepers of the mystical gates of Earth.
Well, this is what I grew up with, I'll be honest. This is the nature of sort of Druidry and Freemasonry, and this was the, if you like, the dream of it, is that our occult, because people forget that people who practice occult, they're not socialites very often. They're people who've spent a lot of hours studying the dynamics of interplay between people and between themselves and nature, and some very subtle stuff that takes a good bit of study to see the relevance, because I'm a big believer that things that aren't relevant don't tend to stay. It's only when there's an absolute nature and relevance that things become apparent and useful and tools. So in the 70s and 80s, I think everybody had that dream that there would be an occult revealing. And this is funny, because this is what I'd said I'd like to talk about a little bit about, is the great revealing. When I was growing up, there was a great revealing. This age from 2018 on would be the beginning of the new age. And little did I know that the root of the great revealing, of course, is the Talmud and the predictions within Revelations. And, that often need to be mentioned. But it was sort of, how can I explain it? The lodge is a mixed group. From what I know of the people in there, 90% of the people were just rock and rollers, really, with a sort of an interest in astronomy and a dynamic with music. And what I've realized, the great revealing, all of a sudden, even though I have a show there, which is, for all intents and purposes, it probably needs an age limit on it, because the knowledge which I'd like to at some point impart is such a degree that it takes a mature mind to make sure that it doesn't get into the hands of the wrong people. But what I realized was that the dark arts that's dressed over the world at the moment, the Talmud says it very clearly, it has to be there, because without that pressure, there's no way the human psyche can ever become
yes, that's exactly right. Yes,
it just cannot become fully developed, because it's like training a child into a sports team. Without the sport, they would never know. how to play. And so and I think this is, again, it's that satanic age. It's Satan's pressure and contractive energy. And what I realized was, and this is again going back to the transit of the planet Saturn and Jupiter, is for the last, as long as we've known, for the last 20 years, they've been progressively moving together until 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And at the Grand Conjunction, then they started moving away from each other. And it dawned on me that this reflective in the human being is, for a long while, we were seeing unity of the two polarities coming together. But now we're seeing that divide, and we can feel it in the inner soul, the movement away of chaos from order, and those polarities moving away from each other, which on one level is quite freeing, and that sort of bipolar nature of thought becomes more clear because we can see both aspects, but also they're moving away from each other. So there's a longing and a loss. And this subtle voice that's in us, same as the voice of the solar voice in us, and let's say in the same way as the lunar voice within us, and we all have them. We know when it's dark of the moon, we know when it's full moon, we know when it's a sunny day, we know when it's a grey over day. Well, why not the subtle body seeing and feeling those two parameters, the two biggest planets in our sphere of influence? And since I started to look upon them, I realized just how contractive and expansive energy is part of the human makeup. That's the only two ways I can put it: expansive and contractive. And of course, Rudolf Steiner talked a lot about this. He had some interesting concepts around the same. So this is another movement back into understanding those two planets and how they are affecting us in our daily transits, and as a society, how they're affecting us as a society. It's very important, I think.
Well, Steiner was one of those we talked about earlier, who was one of the vanguards. And, he came out of the mystery schools, he understood them, but at the same time, he was a clairvoyant, and he was able to access, I guess we'll say, the Akashic records, for lack of a better term. He was able to access time frames both before and after his own lifetime. I mean, some of his writings going back to 100 years ago are remarkably prophetic of the time that we're in right now.
Yeah.
And very much reflect the very things that we need to deal with right now. So, I mean, I think Steiner's come into his own. I think now is the time that Steiner wrote for, whether he knew that or not. He projected a much longer skein of time, but I suspect that the days have been shortened, and that the time that Rudolf Steiner saw then is now.
You could well be right, because he did predict his teachings to become prolific in this age. And now he was very torn, though, because his movement away from what is termed doctrines of Lucifer, we'll use that as a very broad concept, and what he called was Christ's light. He, at the end of his life, he saw through some of the mechanisms of what he'd been involved with, because of course he's just one person, and he was a very interesting guy, in as much as he was very, very much an empath. The whole story, whereas he took kids from the tobacco factories and he rescued them because mechanization came in, and he knew that those kids were going to be sort of disregarded. So it shows that he had an empathic, but at the end of his life, and at the end of his life, what did he do? He said, no, I only want to teach children, very young children. And of course, then he got into his astrological sort of gardening, biodynamics, because I think in the end, from what I read, that he couldn't teach anything else that he knew wasn't beneficial. Anything else was, and I felt the same in the last few years, is hypothetical and irrelevant. A lot of occult practice is hypothetical and irrelevant, but some of it certainly is not. And I think this is the teasing away of perhaps of the great revealing that we're in, what I'm going to sort of refer to again and again as the great revealing. And some of the stuff I've dug up over the last year has been fabulous, really. But I realized that this is not just a very small niche groups of elites, lodges, and this is a very, very major project. And the best way to look at it is called the Great Revealing, and it seems as if they've taken it as a methodology to create a blanket across the consciousness of humanity, so that we get the best possible chance at understanding the natures of the absolute. And that's what I recognize was what the dream was in the 80s in those occult circles, was that the human mind will eventually become full of concepts, not full of 5G. Nobody saw that coming. Maybe some of us, but and I'm sure they'll try and interact us with this, and you know, Google will be on tap. But I think the Great Revealing is bigger than that. I think it's much, and you know, there are going to be some dark things, like some of the stuff I've learned about the underground. You know, it's something that we will have to deal with as a human race. There's no two ways that we won't have to deal with some very serious issues in the future. But right now, we have to look at our own self and look at where we are. You know, where's the tip of our consciousness, and how useful is that in our absolute immediate now space? Going into now space, I follow a guy who does some legal stuff. I do with lay litigation, and he talks recently a lot about the now space and how it's a legal dimension, and how most law syntax is based on past and future and has no relevance in the present. And I just think, again, we're talking about something very real that's so overlooked, the now space. What are we now? Not have we been and should we be, but what are we? And I think that's, again, it's about being a witness of knowing where we are is going to be something more important than who we are in the future.
You're talking about quantum syntax and how our language, like our culture, has tossed us back and forth between past and future. And yet, the way things are structured, we never really dwell in now, and the eternal now, which is this very moment in which we conceive and then execute our thought and our actions going forward, you know, pretty much the speed of light. If light had a speed, it doesn't. Light doesn't travel. That's Mr. Russell told us that, Walter Russell. But when you stop to consider that everything in our society is based on the next moment, and then, of course, the wounds in the past, but we never live in now. We never stop, and we never pause at that place where time expands outward from us rather than something that's happening to us. And I think that's a lot of, you know, what you're describing here is humanity now must learn to live in the eternal present. That time is simply a mechanism. It's a construct that was created. It's useful in physicality, but it does not serve us when we are diverted by the buffering back and forth of these rolling waves of past and future.
Oh, for sure. I mean, again, we're going back to the Oscar Kismet stuff where...
Of course, yeah, exactly.
You know, the nature of memory itself and the loss of telepathy, that replacement where we gain this ability to hold reason and to hold knowledge, but we sort of vacated our telepathy. This is, you know, the common tongue is what Oscar Kismet had suggested was the telepathy and that we'd lost. So there again, we've got this, we've got so adjusted into a future and past memory-based intellectual perceptibility that we lost the very presence of telepathy, which is in the now. And I think with technological age now revolutionizing the world, this is why we've got that general direction coming back. And again, I think we could see that in the 60s, certainly at the lodge I was involved with. that was very, very commonly discussed. You know, the idea that universal wage, that we'll all be living in this sort of slightly utopic society, but there's a bridge or two across a few fast rivers along the way to get to that point. And I think that's what we've realized now. Now we're here, we realize it isn't just going to be that easy. We're going to have to be mindful. And again, I mean, I love poetry. I lost a lot of poetry in a fire a few years ago. And one of the things about poetry is that it's timeless. It's spoken from the now, and yet it can be insinuating both past and future as one trinity. And that, I think poetry has always tried to do that. It's tried to be timeless. And so I know this evening, when you asked about a show, I sort of immediately felt that some poetry would be something like relevant. And
yes, very relevant.
I've got one small one here. It's not a very pleasant one, but it is one. And it's really to lay a sort of a foundation for some work I'd like to do over the next year, based on the Great Revealing, or the not so great revealing, as we probably have learnt to think of it. But this was by Jack Parsons, and again, it really goes a long way to look at where. Now, to give a little backstory to this, I've been studying the history of Moore Hall Studios and how their occult thread with L. Ron Hubbard, and I've got some names here, as we said.
This is a Babylon Rising.
Oh my goodness!
The Moonchild ritual that was done at Palo Alto. What, 47? Was it 47?
This was 1912, I think, when they started Hall Studio. 1912 in England.
Okay, in England.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does Hubbard and Parsons?
They came in much later.
Right, of course.
They were much later. They were involved with Walt Disney and his brother. I didn't realize Walt had a brother.
Of course.
But now this is another show altogether, so I won't get into who they actually manifest as in society, because that's a whole dimension that'd be a great show. But would just like to leave it at sort of what I believe they were trying to bring about. Now, I'm going to sit on the fence, because I'm not going to say that any of these people were at any dark arts, but I do believe that they were very, very aware of things like the teachings of Oscar Kismet and the dark arts. And I wouldn't even go as far as to say some of these people may be masquerading as dark entities, specifically to serve a purpose within the Great Healing. And so this was something that Jack Parsons wrote. Again, I'll not put anything up on this, but just these were the words. Let her dedicated be consecrated, blood to blood, mind to mind, single in will, none without the circle, all to me. And she shall wander in the witch wood under the night of Pan, and know the mysteries of the goat and the serpent, and of the children that are hidden away. Wow. There's a lot to say that for that age, coming from those families, being an apprentice of Aleister Crowley, there's nothing to say that was not a revealing. Jack Parsons might have been persecuted for revealing such an inner perception, and it mightn't have been quite what we think, that he was goading or gloating. that doesn't strike me immediately off the page. A lot like Yeats's work, a lot of it can be seen in double talk. One of the problems with losing telepathy and only having these hemispheres is that lies and deception and double talk became a gift within humanity.
Oh, it was a gift of the tongue.
And sometimes
the tongue deceiveth,
So real. When you study Kismet, you realize that nature is, and you can see now the push for 5G and get the hive mind and all of these concepts that's in the air right now. To remove that is because inside every human being, we know this.
The technology will completely destroy it, left to its own devices, because the technology is a synthetic. You know, what we were destined to come into in this age has been served by technology to the degree that we've allowed it to serve us, as it does tonight, as we're speaking over the World Wide Web. But the concept of synthetic telepathy, which, you know, that's a real thing, and it's been weaponized. It's been used by the various agencies for decades now, is that it will create a permanent sealing of the intuitive sense, the human ability to function organically within the realm of empathy and telepathy. And telepathy isn't what people think it is. It's not mind reading. It's knowing. It's me and you sharing a thought, and that thought can be, either one of us can speak it. We do this all the time. You're speaking things tonight. We didn't rehearse this. Simply come on and you speak, and we're of one accord because our minds are, in a kind of interesting way, sort of connected.
Oh, for sure. I even question whether in the great picture, in the great revealing, I have to say, because it's awful pragmatic of me, but maybe this is essential. Maybe there is a magnetism that's needed, electromagnetic training of the human mind to trust, back to trust. One of the things I always say about telepathy, there's 2 or 3 different versions of telepathy. One of them is based on fear, which is the adrenal release that causes the eventually adrenochrome, but adrenal release to reach the cerebellum and the pineal gland, which again sort of puts out this projection and reflection around what we would be afraid of. You know, there's the heart pumps, it makes our awareness super sharp. So that's one form of telepathy. But there's the other form, of course, which is love. You know, being with your tribe, knowing that connectivity, knowing what somebody's thinking. But that third telepathy, this is the one I think that is this aspiration that we're looking towards. And this is almost like clairvoyance, telepathy, as in we can hear what each other are thinking. There'll be no need for words. And the only way that can occur is in a utopian age, whereas everything is laid on. We haven't got to want for anything. So our physiology is no longer so manifest important, because we're not toiling the earth to put clothes and a roof above us. When that's removed, the biblical sort of toiling the earth, it may release the ability for trust back towards this other common denominator, the common tongue. And I think that's this is, again, we're in that part of the human evolution, and we must keep watching that, because you know, our psyches could be hijacked in the future if we're not careful. But I'd still say that the technology
very
is
much
magnetizing the human mind into particular ways of thinking, perhaps, if not actual thoughts, you know, which could be good. You know, sometimes it's the opposite, isn't it? We're having the opposite done to us. So when it's released, there it is. There's the gold.
Yeah. You know, turning the earth. I mean, this was a curse. I don't know that people who read the Bible understand exactly what happened there, but that was a curse upon man and upon the earth. Yeah. Everything changed. They called it the fall. It wasn't that. It was a whole lot of other things, like I said earlier, including a fair amount of meddling by beings who did not have our best interests at heart. And as a result of that, we were cursed to do something that we never needed to do, because the earth was able to provide. And I mean, you know, we talked about the weather earlier, and the fact that you ask yourself, how is it that humans are inhabiting a world that's so hostile to us, where so much of what we have to do is defend ourselves against the forces of nature, or these, even the natural forces of nature. And I argue that they're not. This is part of what they call the fall, but which is really the control grid that was erected over this earth, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and which has been the control grid. And that control grid, and this goes back to my 2019 vision, where I saw the control grid disintegrating bit by bit, that it was falling apart as a result of the energies that were coming into the earth. And now we're going back to 2019 winter solstice, and the energies that had come into the earth at that time. Saturn and Jupiter were dancing then too. And there was a high level of cosmic energy coming into the earth on that night. That energy was part of, let's face it, and this again will go to the receiver's message, we're in a war. We're in a war of consciousness. We're in a war of dark against light, good against evil, and they all serve one purpose in the end. And that is the acceleration that we're going through in this present time. It's intense. It's been a hard year for people. I mean, God bless us all. We've had to endure hardships on personal levels, hardships, financially hardships on every conceivable level of existence in this year. Constant plague warnings and wars and all of this. And this is all just part of the convolution of forces that are whirling on the earth right now, because this thing does not want us to rise. And yet deep down inside of themselves, the elites know, they know that this is fait accompli. They can only compress this for so long.
Yeah, definitely. No, it is. The passage of human consciousness is it's not ever going to stop now without eliminating everybody, and that's not going to happen in itself.
No, they're not. It's not allowed.
The millennial age is predicted for many thousands of years, and what it suggests is after the fountain of knowledge, the age of the fountain of knowledge, it will become corrupted. And this is actually what my poem that I wrote just when we first connected. I got inspired to write a small piece. It's very small, and anybody who understands about the millennial age and about the transformation that we're going through right now will get this. Otherwise, it might seem a little abstract. So you have to bear with me if it's a little
Go
abstract.
for it. We have an abstract audience.
After many sort of attempts at a heading, I eventually realized that what I was trying to say was raking dross that raises upon the molten ore. Raking dross upon the molten ore after the hard and many ages of eating upon the fruits of knowledge. And since 500 years, the fountain of knowledge has gushed. 5,786 years since its prediction. Finally, the divided and separated mind succumbs. That truth itself would become inverted, preparing the way for the millennial age. With this self-triggered trap, persecuting the uncritical, the selfless, and leaving God's chosen children. The question is now, is might right, or do the Gentile inherit the earth? And this is a question I'm left with right now, is might going to always be right? Or is the intelligentsia able to bring gentility and intellect into the same domain to take on and inherit the earth? This is a question that we all have to ask about ourselves, I think, is, are we acquiring things through might, or are we acquiring things through the intellectual capacity of balance? And I think this is going to be the challenge for the next while.
This is the war. This is the war.
Yeah.
This is the forces of light versus the God of forces.
Yeah.
This
and we
is
have to
what
choose.
Daniel talks about, and he talks about the God of forces. This is mechanistic science, it's militarism, it's deep state political intrigues, murder, kidnapping, rape, cannibalism. I mean, gosh, this year cannibalism went off the charts. Unbelievable. Everything we talked about when we were talking about the Kismet book, suddenly cannibalism became hip and they made movies about it. And the elite families started talking about their own proclivities. And it's like, the screw is turned again, hasn't it?
Well, I thought I'd come through a lot of sort of understanding around cannibalism, and I've been avoiding a whole topic for many years because I didn't know how to get into it, to be honest with you. But this, of course, is corpse medicine, and corpse medicine is a very real thing, and it has never actually ever left the medical institutes. They're still sort of using that same idea around what is medicine. One of the things, after studying cannibalism, after being in this sort of lodge that was affiliated to cannibalism, is how much affiliation in psychedelics. They were very much involved with mushroom, sort of using mushrooms for healing. And all of a sudden I started to, well, not all of a sudden, actually, for the longest time, I've watched myself realize how nature provides. So even if we did fall and we had this sort of cannibal sort of traditions during times of desperados, of disasters, then it appears that gland that people chased after and hunted for, nature gave us in different forms in the natural world. And I find that fascinating, how we've been given so many gifts. And
lean forward into the camera a little bit there, brother, so we can see you. Thank you. Yeah, much better.
Yeah, because I cannot see. I can see myself now. But no, we're in a terrific time for change, and cannibalism, as they invoke it, it's part of the great revealing. This is what they told me when I was very young. Is in 2018 they would start to come out from underground. And that was a metaphor, but it was a reality as well. And now I look back and I say, well,
can vampirism be far behind? Oh, that's right, it already isn't.
Yeah, no, it is one and the same, isn't it?
They're one and the same, yes.
There was an interesting one talking about vampirism. Joe Rogan had somebody on, and I forget what movies this guy had made. It was some very famous movies, but he said, he said vampires, he said they only come out every couple of 100 years, which I thought was interesting. He said, and when they do come out, he said, they're so used to the natural order of things and all the trees and the way things move. He said, this is why a cross works with a vampire, because if you put a cross up to a vampire, they can't get past the perpendicular, the 90 angles. It throws them out, and they actually are discouraged from their activities and their feeding spree by a cross, because they're not used to those angles. They're used to natural movements,
flowing organic forms.
And Joe Rogan's face was he was taken aback, because it was an interesting concept that could well be reality. And as they come out from underground right now, the great revealing is that's what I'd always been told.
It absolutely is. Yeah. We're at we've kind of tipped over the hour mark, but that's okay. We started late. And I see that our next round of guests has shown up. And so what I propose at this point is, let's take a musical break for a few minutes, go freshen up whatever it is you're drinking, whatever rounds one needs to make to the privy, and we will return back here in maybe about 5 to 7 minutes. And,
I'll give you one last little liner before you go with the music, because it's only short.
Go for it.
Wild horses of our desire tumble through the mountain wind and ride away with our sanity for fun, just for fun.
Wow. There's that. Well, WolfAmos, my friend, it's good to have you on the show tonight. I hope you stick around. And I know it's early morning in Ire, so you're forgiven if you retire for the evening. We love you and we value your gift. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the invite, and I shall certainly have a listen here and have a listen to the other people on the show. It'd be great.
Excellent. Okay, that's gonna wrap it up for this segment. We're gonna come back and freewheel with our friends from the Gold Pill podcast, and all things technical have been difficult tonight, but we're getting through it, and so we'll just kind of leave it with that for this hour and return on the other side with more Off Planet Radio. I'm Randy Maugans, and we'll be back shortly.
You are listening to Off Planet Radio at offplanetradio.com.
And we are back. Second segment of Off Planet Radio, running behind as usual. It doesn't matter. We're in the eternal now, right now, if we want to be. Again, I apologize for my voice. Earlier this week, I could barely speak, and I've nursed it along with hot tea, lemon, honey, some Ricolas, and sort of limping along vocally tonight. Upcoming, we're going to have the ladies from the Gold Pill podcast with us. Amy and Meredith are going to join us. And what I want to do next is we've got a message from the receivers. The receivers are, from my standpoint, kind of spooky. I never set out to do this, but it became, I guess, kind of a form of creation as I've been working on writing seriously over the last 2.5 years. What began to emerge was a voice that I basically began to receive, hence the name receivers, via automatic writing, where I would sit down with a stylus and sometimes several hours would go by and things would begin to be written that weren't actively in my own conscience. And as a result of that, I sometimes kind of freaked out by it because I don't always even agree sometimes, I think, with what it is that they're telling me. And some of the things they've broken out have been, let's just say, a little bit radical. But this message, which I had started last week, this message was actually finished, concluded 30 minutes before showtime tonight. It all came together. What happens is I get bits and fragments, and then generally what happens is I go back and they instruct me to move things around and change things and edit things. This is going to be somewhat unedited. It's very brief, in keeping with the night being short here in North America. You folks on the other side of the globe get a much warmer, hopefully longer evening, and you move into summer while we go through the 3 days of the sun standing still on the horizon. So this is a receiver's message, Solstice 2022. You are now on a stage where convoluted, unresolved, emotionally stressed time waves have converged. The accumulated weight of the last 60 years, a Tibetan century mark, are passing and shall consummate, resolve inside this present cycle. The world, the system as you know it, has irrevocably changed. You're not returning to some mythical normal. The reset was cosmically initiated, set in place by forces outside of Earth, beyond the control of the so-called controllers. The great temporal shift began on August 21st, 2017, with what was called the Great American Eclipse. And on that day, the time gates shifted tracks as our scribe has so observed. You may call this a parallel or alternative timeline, though we dislike the linearity of that term. It was, in fact, the tracks of temporal gates opening and shifting as the consciousness waves transmitted from the central sun permeated the mass consciousness, the mass unconscious, to be precise. Henceforth, the workings of man upon the earth realm have undergone extensive, intensive realignments of what you perceive as radical polarization. This was described, we would say prophesied over a century ago by your poet, William Butler Yeats, as such, when he wrote, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is unloosed upon the earth. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." And so that time gate was the 5-year period following the 2012 gates, which opened and marked the beginnings of what some have called a 7-year period of great tribulation. And so you are now in the final, give or take, 2 years of the 7-year window. We use solstices and major eclipses as our markers. The intensity, the radical state of separation in the human mass unconscious has been so awakened to provide humanity in this period with very clear distinctions of the courses upon which your world has been set. As the old scriptures said, choose you which way you will go. For some will remain as captives, though they need not. Others will find the heart path back to source, which is the unity of purpose and the unveiling of the one new mankind, which is birthing. Understand, this is a war. It has been such for many millennia. We, as your ancestors, left you the breadcrumbs of wisdom inside our deepest yearning. The implacable desire to be returned to your first estate, to abide within the councils of ages and the reunion of souls which were before the very thrones of time itself. This is a war of inestimable magnitude, which quickens as the dying gasps of empire, this being the god of forces, or what you know as materialism, the morbid psychology of the egoic system, the control vectors of the dying apex predator and its symbiotic network of overlords, covens, secret societies, and off-world interlopers, these all sensing the impending collapse of their 40,000-year reign over Earth and her inhabitants. The dividing of ages and the dividing of worlds, whose course will be decided by the inner lights, which are the beacons we set forth for you, for us, eons ago. Now upon this solstice, we bid you all much love, that you may embrace the reward, that you may be lights magnified and be as beacons unto those who are yet to join us. Blessed solstice to you all. Take from this that which is profitable, discard that which does not resonate. We are the receivers. We are your ancestors, soul groups, and aspect selves. We are you. Peace out. And so that is the message. I will publish this wherever the video can be found on YouTube and on the Patreon group. We'll put this out as a segment. That's the message. Let's turn the corner here, and I have with me, who are presently in the Zoom chat cloaked, but I'm going to ask Meredith and Amy to kind of step in, open up your microphones, open up your video cams if you wish to, and there's Meredith popping up. Amy likes to stay stealth, by the way, so she'll be the voice, hopefully with a little icon or something that we recognize her. Welcome, guys, to Solstice. Welcome to Off Planet. It's good to see you.
Hi, Randy.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're more than welcome. I'm the blessed one because I don't have to do all the talking. As you can tell, my voice is sort of cracking apart here.
Sounds like music to me, Randy. So
Aw.
it's my Pisces rose-colored glasses there. Yes.
Thank you. So you are the Gold Pill podcast. I can say that. Let's tell people a little bit about you, who you are, what you do. You're two very different people, and yet you seem to harmonize real well together when you're doing the podcast.
Aw, yeah, we have a lot of love for each other.
Yeah.
So Amy, if you don't mind, I'll just share.
Love it.
So I'm Meredith, and I do astrology and energy work, and kind of got brutally awoken. I don't know if that, like, what the proper.
Not woke. Woke's
Not
the opposite
woke.
of awake.
Awake. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was like brutally woken up with with like memories and visions that kind of shattered everything for me in terms of like what I previously believed in 2020. So it's been a really interesting ride to get to here. And then I met Amy, and Amy, when did I meet you? October?
Yeah, October
2021
Scorpio season. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Scorpio season of 2021. And we just got along really well, and we decided to start a podcast. So yeah.
Well, we compared our Patreons to each other, and they were basically like from start to finish the same. So it was like, oh, okay, maybe we will have a lot in common. I singled out Mare on Instagram because she had a meme account called Meming the Apocalypse, and I cannot think of
an outlet.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I cannot think of a more like gold pill like sentiment, right? And so and she started, I followed her from then, and then we just had a lot in common, and she started talking one day about the gold pill as this idea, and I couldn't get enough. And so then we from there gave birth to this podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. There's a little bit of time lag. So we've had the blue pill and the red pill. What the hell is the gold pill?
It's the better option.
There you go. The third way.
That's right. It's the us option. I think that we are like put into a lot, like, I mean, I've noticed since I started noticing things, apparently, that we have been kind of put into this like contrived polarity, like of right and left, red and blue, it has to be this way or this way, and I just don't really identify with that. The gold has always been a frequency that I connect to, the divine, or whatever you want to call that energy. And so I feel that that's something that's within us, and not to be maybe always like externalized. I might not be God, but I come from God, and as a result of that have a little bit of that in me. So that's the gold pill, I think, like distilled down into like,
It also it has some alchemical sort of connotations, which are really fun, and then also just kind of to to go back to what you were saying with the messengers and the receivers, excuse me, Randy, is that it's like the light that's within that guides us. And so that's kind of our inner lantern. And we've kind of recently, every like month, we get new ideas of what it is. And recently we were sort of talking about this idea that the new sun is very white, and the gold light is a light that is very, it's just dim enough to see. And so you can kind of see things a little more clearly. It's not so stark and white. So there's sort of something to that as well, that resonance.
That's interesting, because the white light that people like have kind of been sort of maybe, led into running in their body through like various new age practices.
Sure.
I think like kicks you out of your body. That's my experience. Whenever I like run white light through my body, it like kicks me out of my body. And that's kind of the opposite direction that we want to go right now, because the human body is like prime real estate in the universe apparently right now. So
it's the final
It
frontier.
it is.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that as well, staying in your body, because we can get real cerebral and we can get airy fairy spiritual and forget that we inhabit a body and that the body is part of who we are. Obviously, at some point, you jettison the coil, but it's still important. And, we were talking earlier about photonic light and about the DNA and the fact that, DNA is light bearing. And this is the universe inside of us. It's, it's what WolfAmos was talking about. I think we all get this picture of light as something that's external, but it's actually not. It's something that's within us. And I mean, you're like the poster child for somebody who woke up. You were literally ripped out of the uterus of the universe, so to speak. It's kind of graphic, but really, I mean, for some people, that's what awakening is. It's painful. It's brutal.
It was. I would say that that's an appropriate way to describe it, just because, I mean, I had been doing things like releasing entities, healing childhood trauma, like doing that kind of stuff, but I just didn't really, it's the typical American thing, right? Like you're not really looking around you that much to see what's going on. And I think that the memories and the visions, along with what started to happen, all came together to create a brilliant shitstorm that was pretty brutal.
A brilliant shitstorm. Yeah.
It's just how it goes. The nature. Go ahead, Magda.
Okay, so it's interesting that Wolf was talking about DNA, because that's exactly what I came to talk about. I like woke up from my nap prior to coming on here and I was like, let's talk about DNA, because the astrology is very physical body oriented. There's like plenty of opportunities to check out, but there's a lot of opportunities to, refuse to do that and to check deeper and deeper and deeper in with yourself. So
yes. Yeah. I mean, there is a time to check out. Everything has, as Ecclesiastes says, a season.
Yeah.
But this isn't the season for that. Although it is the season, there's a lot of people checking out right now for various reasons. Some of it natural and some of it not so much.
Well, my mentality has always been like one that goes away from the herd. And so when I see everyone checking out, it's time for me to check in, it's very much time to do exactly the opposite of what everyone is doing. So I didn't there's this show on Netflix right now that I can't help but avoid knowing about. It's that show Wednesday, Tim Burton, and I have not seen it. I know nothing about it other than it's literally everywhere, and a perfect example of something I would like to avoid.
So Amy, tell us a little bit about your journey. By the way, don't forget to plug, you work with Niche doing a podcast with her as well.
I do. Nick and I do a podcast called Prima Donnas of the Gutter.
I know, and it's awesome.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun, and it would honestly, just a shout out to this whole community. I can't say it enough. Like, there would be none of this without everyone here. I mean, everyone. And I've heard WolfAmos talk before. I've heard most of you probably speak before on different podcasts. And so it really has trickled into everything that we do, especially at Gold Pill. And me personally, around like 2010, I was like working in real estate, and I had a background in psychology and stuff. And I had a real bad attitude sort of my whole life. And so I really just always kind of thought things were bullshit. And that was just like a thing that I had to deal with. And then that it caught up with me when I was 30. And I like a whole bunch of, kind of not exactly like what Mare went through, but that sort of just a whole reframe of my whole life sort of occurred before my eyes. And that's about the time that, I started watching lots of like late night YouTube and really just sort of expanding my mind. And then I spent a long time, working on the logic of it all and trying to make sense of all the crazy stuff that I had heard. And that's around 2017, my dad passed away. And that's when I found you and Emily, Randy. And so much of the stuff that you were talking about, I was in this what I would refer to as like a right brain space where just there was no time. It was just really kind of ethereal, and it's just very like liminal sort of. And so I was really taking in everything that you guys were saying on like a different wavelength. And so at that point, things started really clicking. And then a couple more things have happened. Started talking to Mare, but it's a long process of true alchemy and coming to terms with just who I am and the experiences that my family and I carry, and trying to right the things that have been perpetrated in this realm.
It's almost like a common narrative that, and you talked about the community. This is a community. It's an extended community. There's no rivalry here between podcasts and broadcasts and YouTube channels. And, each one of us is our own unique, I'll be crass for a minute. We're kind of our own product. And there's enough of us to go around, and the diversity is amazing. And yet at the same time, the commonality is this awakening process that occurs, and then the processing and healing of traumas and past events and inner child work, which, it's that's become a cliche, but it's not a cliche, because if you listen to the receiver's messages, they talk a lot about the ancestors. And a lot of what we're doing is ancestral work. We're not only healing ourselves, we are healing people in a continuum, both what we call past and future, because it's a continuum. And, that's again, it's kind of like the concepts of, is the earth flat or round? Well, the answer is it's both. And the answer is that we are our ancestors, we are our progeny, we are one stream of consciousness and light, and we're projecting this universe, and then we play in it, and it's kind of our sandbox. But there's trauma involved, there's pain involved, and a lot of it is ancestral, and a lot of it is stopping the abuse that has gone on for millennia with this race.
Yes.
When we stop it here, we stop it, we freeze it, we heal it, we reverse it. When we do that, we actually reverse time as well. There's an interesting dynamic with time. There is time. I mean, there's timing and there's time. And we use time as a device. And the healing process itself is something in the realm of the miraculous, which, and this goes into, if you've ever read A Course in Miracles, whether you like it or not, they deal with this a lot. They deal with the fact that, basically we use time as a tool to go back and heal the past and the future from the present now, which is the eternal now. That's fascinating concepts.
Totally.
I run another Instagram called the Montauk Effect, AFF.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And it's a sort of like an end of the world. Like, it's not really a podcast. It's sort of more a place. We call it aftercare for people who have have an afterlife. And it is sort of like a psychological sort of angle on things, but it's amazing to see how many people are resonating with the psychological and emotional behavioral stuff right now, and how many people are looking to heal and know there's trauma. And again, it's that idea that the inner child, the trauma, it almost becomes cliche, almost by design, but it's such a clencher. And there's so many things that make us, ill over time or whatever, but the trauma is such a real piece of it. And honestly, if when we are able to heal pieces of ourselves, I never went to a therapist, not saying anything's wrong with that at all, but that just wasn't for me. I think there's a beauty to being able to heal yourself. And I think there's real miracles there. And I think that being able to be a living example of someone who did that, to know so many people who have done that. And just when you think about the root of how many things trauma can cause, I mean, there's a whole healing movement, and it's with like a capital H, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's a totally different way. It's an inner thing. It's these things where they sound like, oh, it's all from the inside out, but it really is. And it's really a matter of, in the time thing, going back into time, and we're the tree, right? Like we are the branch, we are the trunk, and then we are the leaf as well. And if we fall, then we become another tree. And so I don't buy this idea of, death. I buy into material death, but everything lives on, everything has a lifespan and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, because we operate in polarity, we operate in contrast.
Sure.
And I think in this time we're being trained towards something you might call eternity, something that goes beyond time. I think our consciousness has to be stretched in order to really grasp that. And the healing of trauma forces us to confront not only our past, but our future, because we can't move forward. And anybody who deals with trauma, abuse, so many of the people that have come through my show over the years, Elisa E., who we just had on Off Planet Radio, they realize at some point that there's a time aspect to this. The concept even of alters created by MK Ultra is this slivering of the human consciousness as something that 20, 30 years ago we didn't talk about. I mean, look, these are hallmarks of the times we live in, that MK Ultra is now mainstream. I mean, it's almost, I don't want to say this condescendingly, it's almost become boring to talk about, because you can go watch any number of shows on Netflix right now that show you MK Ultra programming. And the world has been MK Ultra'd.
Yes,
totally.
And
please
go ahead, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that was one of the biggest things about listening to your shows, was a time when MK Ultra was still sort of, and it was sort of a fresh topic, let's say, as far as the amount of airtime it was getting, but also it hadn't been beat like a dead horse sort of right now. But the problem with it kind of being beat like a dead horse is that we lose this idea, like you were just saying, that while it was done to these celebrities, that programming, I mean, just think about when you're in a bad mood and bake a cake. The cake is not going to taste as good. So if you're putting all these accused people into art, and that is the art that I'm consuming and the whole culture is consuming, then we have all in effect been sort of contaminated by that abuse. And I don't think people consider it on that level, but it's I mean, Britney Spears having all this stuff going with her is one thing, but the amount of airtime that people give to the surface level of salacious topics that are terrible things, like for instance, human trafficking, they just touch the surface. They want to get the glitz, the clicks. And then the terrible stuff, of course, does not get mentioned unless it's by people in our community. Quite honestly, there's people who handle it respectfully and people who exploit the exploited. And anyways, it's just a deep thing like that. It trickles down. Everyone has been affected by it, and it's not just Hollywood. The Hollywood people have programmed us, and I encourage everyone to look within when they hear that.
Yeah. The danger all along was that it would be trivialized, and what has happened is now it's entertainment. And that's not the point of what we did on this show, going back even 10 years ago when I first started on the subject of MK Ultra with Duncan and Finian. The point was to bring it forward in a conversation where we could begin to understand it from a global standpoint, that MK Ultra wasn't some random CIA operation. It had deep roots all over the world. It still does. But the thing about MK Ultra now is that MK Ultra has gone direct. They don't require any more recruiting people into programs for long periods of time and splitting their consciousness, because now with electronic control of people, use of devices, beaming, and all of these various and sundry ways that they're able to just take people they've already targeted and just fragment them and send them off to do whatever it is they're going to do in that particular day, school shootings, whatever. It's become a technological achievement, and they were able to basically use it against all of us in this current situation, which is what we're coming out of right now.
Totally.
Yeah.
You brought up something that I kind of want to go back to that
Sure.
ties into the astrology, which is the ancestral healing and the inner child healing piece, and how those things work together. Well, the US has its Pluto in Capricorn.
Yeah, exactly.
We are right now at this very moment, exactly in the US Pluto return. So while we all chop wood, carry water, there are so many big changes that are likely being legislated, and I think that, Pluto in Capricorn is opposite Cancer, right? And Cancer is our roots. It's the family, and I think that it's interesting, this, American experiment that we found ourselves in, because we're all kind of disconnected from our actual lands, from our actual cultures, and it's so, we love the melting pot, yay, but also there is some measure of spiritual protection. And I think that people having awareness of where they come from and what their past is makes them harder to control. So it's necessary, I think, for this phase of whatever we're going through to make sure that we are disconnected from our lands, disconnected from our cultures, our roots, because that makes people, I think, easier to be corralled in this direction or that direction. And so I saw someone in the comments in the Zoom room say that they've been looking into their genealogy. And I actually think that this is a very powerful and potent time to do something like that, or to, work with your ancestors directly too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I do find it really funny, speaking of ancestors, we have a lot of people that like to clutch their pearls at the gold pill, which is totally fine. I have my pearl clutching moments as well. But it's funny because when people want to rail on what a great, I don't even know how to say this, what a wholesome society America is and the European way of life is, that's really great. But it's then they go and show the pagan, the pagan parades. And I've heard a few episodes with WolfAmos. I mean, I'm pretty up to speed on what our actual, heritage is. And so I do think that it is very important for them to keep us away from that, especially because while it is good to be gentle, there's kind of an issue of, we're farmed, not you and I, not the people who are aware of this, but there is a general kind of idea that people are to be managed and handled.
Livestock. Yeah.
Livestock, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's what, that's why they give you numbers. It's a stock keeping unit number. and basically your inventory.
Mm.
And there can be excess inventory. And then the way you get rid of that is you either put it on sale or you destroy it so that you raise the value of the remaining stock, which is cynically where we're at right now. Human life has never been cheaper. And
That's right.
I don't want to be cynical about that, but what we're seeing now on a global level with the death rates that are, just soaring
Mm-hmm.
because of, certain conditions that were imposed upon the citizenry. And
Indeed.
how is that not control on a materialistic level? And yet there are souls behind this. And there are souls that have lived through things like this before. On one level, it's deja vu all over again, and yet at the same time, it steps up the call to heal this, because everything that we're dealing with now has been before, and were they to have their way, they would take it to the next level. The thing is, our being here, and this is, so important. So many people get caught up in, well, what do I do? Just be. And by that, I mean, elevate yourself, elevate your energy, elevate your presence, your spiritual presence. And you begin to influence the field, just like what we were talking about in the first hour. This contamination of the field that's gone on. Well, that field is a debris field right now, so we have to clean it up. And the way we clean it up is first by making sure that we heal ourselves.
Yeah.
It's so important, which is a lot of the work that you're doing, even with your astrology.
Yeah, I mean, we try, and it's interesting too how, okay, so this is just an observation I've made, and I think this is coming up now since like the nodes are like in Taurus and Scorpio, have been since January 18th of 2022 and will be until July 18th of 2023. And then it moves into Aries and Libra. So Taurus and Aries are pretty much the two most physical, visceral bodily signs. So that's why I'm like, not a bad idea to work on embodiment this year. But I feel that everyone that I talk to, even the people who have like consciously a high self-esteem, underlying, we've been conditioned to think that we're not worthy of taking up space and of being here. Really. I mean, big unworthiness energy rooted in, I think, rushing out to take the thingy.
Yeah.
And I think that it's kind of interesting too. Sorry to bring this up if this is it's kind of a triggering topic for me, but the whole suicide pods thing, right? And, I think that at this point, there are going to be so many off-ramps for people to check out however they will. And I think that for anybody listening, I just want to say that you're worth being here, and like you're worth taking up space here as a human, and like really like being here, it's just look in the mirror and tell yourself that if you feel like it.
Early on, Danny Katz, I was talking with her and she was very clear, because I was like, oh, who would want to hear what I have to say? I'm just so-and-so. And she goes, stop it right there. She goes, that's the program. You're supposed to say stuff like that to yourself. You're supposed to not like yourself. And it was like immediately then it's like it became very clear that this wasn't even my life experience talking to me. It was more than likely just this like reinforced idea. I mean, that I'm not worthy so that I can be sold things, right? And so once I sort of realized the game, it became a little easier to reject that idea that I was not, having a worthy moment or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting too how like that unworthiness thing that kind of like is like a low hum in the background can convince you that like nobody wants to hear what you have to say, given that now people love to listen to what you have to say. And it's just you know.
Well, that's what's so funny. It's like everyone could be saying stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's so many people who don't get out there and do stuff simply because that's their own limitations, which is fine. Not everyone needs to do that, but definitely getting rid of the fear is really cool. In Canada, kind of speaking on the unaliving pods, if you will, just to avoid censors. They have this MAIDS program, which is medically assisted death, and it's basically, you know, you think, oh, the bleeding heart, you know, former liberal of me wants to be like, oh yeah, people who are really, really hurting, like my dad was dying of cancer. It would have been great if he didn't have to like starve himself and he could have had some actual, you know, assistance, right? But then it's, you know, that those laws aren't just for those people. And even if they're written just for those people, the shadow of those laws is always, we're making suicide legal for people, a government assisted suicide. And now it's come out that children can be eligible for this for certain conditions. And then recently, there was a therapist calling veterans who were not interested in doing that at all and offering that to them as opposed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that was one particular therapist. It's not like that's everyone or that was an organ, whatever, but it was definitely like, well, this is the potential of that kind of thinking, you know, and life is valuable. I don't care what people say. It really
I'm going
is.
to extend this argument a little. I'm going to extend this a little bit here.
Yeah.
Because what we're calling suicide is an extension of the same abusive system.
Oof.
The most high-profile suicides generally tend to be people who were under heavy trauma, under heavy mind control. And the conflicted egoic personality at the time that they decide to basically flip the switch. So this is not like medical, where you decide to terminate medically in terms of having a terminal illness as a humane form. This is the standard suicide, which is the result of people who have been cast off by society, who cannot reconcile their psychological ledger book. And, you know, the mindset of suicide, and I know it well, is, you know, that moment when your mind races so fast you can't keep up with it anymore, and you just decide this is the ultimate fuck it moment. You know, and this is the tragedy of the whole thing, is those fuck it moments are being promoted constantly. It's being glamorized.
Being advertised to kids in Toronto on the train, you know, it's like, and I imagine that does have an impact on their subconscious, even if they're not aware that they're seeing it. They're seeing the symbology, they're seeing, you know, they're registering it on some level. And it kind of, I feel that it's important too to bring into the discussion that where trauma and foreign energy or entity influence like mix, because that is like, I can say after doing this work for a long time that if it weren't for entity influence, I don't think that humans would do that, even with trauma. You know, and I think that right now with like what is going on with CERN, there's very obviously this like desire to like pull up like from the underworld, you know, these energies, right? And I think that that's a lot of like what is also driving that. And it, you know, just is, so I think that the same drum that I've been banging this whole time on this particular, you know, edition of the Solstice Gathering is like to be in your body, because that's where is wanted, like for you not to be, right? So that you can, you know, people are getting like possessed, you know, out here. So
well, if they can't get you to suicide, then they want to put you into the metaverse.
Right.
They want to digitize you and turn you into a binary.
Exactly.
Not even a non-binary, just
oh my goodness.
Or they want you to rage, man. There is just that's something I've really noticed a lot lately is I mean, I've got my own theories, but there's been lots and lots of rage, I mean, obviously the economy being what it is creates very interesting climate crime. I always send Nish my the weirdest like crime stuff. And the other day I got someone's Citizen app, which is an app that alerts people to what's going on in their neighborhood crime wise. And someone had been mugged for their hot dog. And I just thought that was a really strong indicator of where we are in the world. It's just really the poverty situation is bad. The homeless, I live in California, the homeless unhoused situation is terrible. And there's not an easy way to think about it or handle it. And it's getting so ridiculous. And what I mean, there's no easy way to handle it is that like it's in the bureaucratic sense, right? Like the way that it's being handled right now. Obviously there would be a way to handle it if there was, no bureaucracy, but
in a wealthy society such as ours,
yes,
there is no excuse for people to be homeless or hungry.
Totally.
Absolutely. And for anyone who is of the mindset that people should pull themselves up for their bootstraps, I had that sort of run through my head for a moment.
Don't have bootstraps. I mean, they don't even have boots.
They don't even have boots, but the idea is that we just gave all this money to overseas, right? And so if you are the hardest core conservative, please understand that we had the money and we could have done it, and we decided to feed the war machine with that money instead.
Well, the war machine's been profitable. It's
100%.
Right. That's right.
That's been the mechanism of Western so-called prosperity,
right,
for 100 years now.
Right.
And they keep dragging us into it. And I'll just say this,
please.
As painful as it is when you look at the current situation in Ukraine, and trust me, my thoughts, my hopes, my prayers are with the people of Ukraine. They are also with the people of Russia, because both are suffering under dictators. It's just that the people in Ukraine elected theirs. I don't know that Russia so much did. But what has really happened is that we've been led into a proxy war. This is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between Western powers and the outliers of the Eastern empires. This is blood wars. These are ancient blood wars, and they're not going to stop because the raging beast that lives inside of this system. And the only way we stop it is we stop the wars between ourselves. We heal ourselves. We heal each other.
The war behind our eyes, huh, Mayor?
Yeah.
Yes. And, the true adversary is in the mirror for the most part. I kind of wanted to go back to something, though, that Amy brought up, and, you guys were talking about the violence and the crime and things like this. And wanted to share that, or just kind of ask and open up the dialogue of but are you guys witnessing that in front of you when you go to the store, when you go here, when you go there? Because for me, I don't really, even in the city, I don't necessarily, when I'm visiting my family, I don't see that as much in front of me. And I know that it's really prominent in the big cities, but it makes me wonder about divine protection, right? Going back to the DNA. I think that our DNA and our energy field, when it's functioning properly, wants to protect us and wants to keep us out of harm and away from danger. So I feel as well that I have been watching specifically people who pushed the treatment on other people, not necessarily people who took it. It's not, I don't really think about it like that, but I think that there's people who pushed it on others. And I am watching as those people have their divine protection completely stripped to the point where terrible shit is happening to them. Just saying, it's an interesting, and then there's what do you do to protect yourself energetically? There's these questions. So yeah.
Nothing's hopeless, but I will say this. There were sufficient warnings about what was coming as a result of the program that was run over the last 2 years. And we were trained, the public was mind controlled out of the normal logic and reasoning that would go behind it. When they told you just trust the science, what they basically told you was there's no science here. This is all witchcraft. And it's exactly what it is. Science became witchcraft. Yes.
Totally. Gold pill gets a lot of vitriol from Christians, here and there, like, because, we're exposing like, the Antichrist or whatever, like, but then, we'll post something about like using protection with salt and stuff like that. And then, suddenly we are like doing witchcraft. And I'm like, dude, why don't you guys punch up? Like, why don't you guys look at like the actual people that are like perpetuating, like, what is me doing a window wash and a floor wash and like a simmer pot and like some hearth magic? Like, is that really hurting anybody, or is it just helping me to be able to help others? I mean, that's the question, right?
Yeah, there's a real I enjoy watching it from my vantage point at Gold Pill and seeing the different reactions from different sorts of people and their personalities. And it reminds me all the time that so many, and I mean this to just, individuals, not as a whole, obviously, but Christians need Jesus, and they do, like, I get it. I love Jesus. I think Jesus is a really, really great, like, energy. I feel like, there is a lot to Jesus in the path that he walked, the energy, however you conceive of that. But in that being said, the Christians need a little to adhere to the teaching if that's what they want to do and call themselves Christians, because they're the ones that we encounter, the most vocal ones that we encounter, the vocal ones are they're not very
evangelicals.
They're praying for the destruction of the world that is on some level a beautiful place that sustains many people for their Messiah to allegedly come. And it's like, you think that the predator class doesn't have a Christ return in the pocket? You know what I mean?
Well,
really?
What they don't understand, because they don't know how to read their own scriptures, is there's really no second coming.
Right.
There isn't. Yes. The Son of Man, that's in the receiver's material, which will get published. That's us. Yeah. We're the Son, S-U-N, of man. We are the sun which rises with healing on our wings.
May I have this discussion with you? Because I love the S-U-N, S-O-N, but I love it to be like this S-O-N, like the sound of God. Like, we also carry
sonos.
Yes.
Yeah, sound.
And I think it's such a neat way of thinking about it too.
In the beginning was the Word.
Yes.
The Word was the formative. It's a frequency. And sound and light are simply variations of the same energetic stream.
The U and the O. It's very interesting.
The problem is, and if you know my background, I came from Christian radio. Originally mainstream Christian radio, and then alternative Christian radio.
The threshold door, or the threshold?
Threshing floor, the threshing floor, yeah. And in the course of doing that show, which was 7 years, that was my 7-year tribulation originally, was doing that show.
Oh, no.
There was a lot of good things about it. But I will say this. These were some of the most dogmatic, narrow-minded people, and willfully ignorant about what they believed, professed, and thought they read inside of their book. Which, when they came to me and they told me that was the word of God, I went, I don't think so.
Right.
I mean, you're going to worship a book. You're going to take manuscripts that have been mangled to death by nearly illiterate scribes back, who knows when. Was it 500 years ago, or was it 1,500 years ago, or 2,000 years ago? It doesn't matter. The bottom line is there's a mystical aspect to the book.
Totally.
And if you know how to read it, it's very valuable, but you can't be literal. And that literalism and that dogmatism drove me out of the church, and then it drove me away from even the alternative Christian movement because of what I saw there in terms of, ignorance and bigotry and hatred for people. They hated people, and they would condemn people in the name of Christ. And I'm like, I don't think he would have done that.
Right.
And see,
No.
the problem is that that's part of the control grid. The control grid includes religion, politics, religion, economics, social institutions. These are all ways that they've controlled us for their own outcomes. And people like us zig to the zag, and that's part of what we do.
Amen.
Amen. And a woman.
A woman as well.
A woman, a human.
I do feel that there is a pulse of like religious fervor, religious fundamentalism.
Yep.
Like you can kind of feel it, like
Mm-hmm.
like kind of, you know, taking up a notch because, well, first of all, it looks like the end of fucking days, right? I mean, even if the
It is. It kind of is, but what
might be
days?
the end of time to us, but to them, it's like, holy shit, this is playing out just like in this book. Must have some legitimacy.
Well, some of that is predictive programming.
That's right.
You know?
Damn it.
Alan Watt talked about that stuff for years.
Mhm.
And some of it is just the fact that there are cycles. And so an apocalypse is an unveiling. It's not Armageddon. And Armageddon is even what we think it is, because Armageddon is an entire metaphor that goes into read Edgar Casey and the literature that they put out on the Book of Revelation, which connects it to the chakra system and the endocrine system. The energy body. We're back to the body again.
Yay.
The Christians talk about the body of Christ. Well, that thing's falling apart, man. And the body that we are is this community, and the people that join us now, the people that will join us later, with the receivers are talking about those who will join us in the future, because we're putting it out there, and the pulse wave just keeps going. We just keep driving the pulse wave. Our presence here is sometimes all that's necessary. And our goodwill, our intentions, our work, yeah, that's important too, but that comes as a result of who we are and how we can form our energy to become something that's healing and wholesome and pro-life, pro-human.
Yeah. You mentioned Armageddon, and it kind of made me think of like how in 2016, 2017, 2018, I was basically getting like every day had a new entity like showing up in my space, and was like trying to, I just felt like I went through the actual battle for my soul. Like, you know what I'm saying? And that to me is something that I've watched, like all of the people that, like, whether they're in this like direct community or not, I've watched them go through. And I'm sure that like most of the people listening to this are either in that right now or have been in that. And, you know, that's definitely like a worthy initiation, you know? I want to be here. I want to exist as an individuated aspect of consciousness. So no, thank you. You know, we're not doing that.
The coolest part looking back about the dark night of the soul, because so much of going into that for me was about like having to co-sign on like terrible business things. Like I was doing property management and I was having to agree to things that I knew just in my heart weren't right. And it was like, oh God. And I was probably agnostic at that point. But ultimately I realized that like I did have a soul, like, you know, because I was really heavily programmed until I was about like 28, 29. And so that's when it all kind of started to break free. And so I
Saturn return.
But the realization, the remembrance that you have a soul to retrieve, there is a soul. It's a remarkable thing.
That's an interesting, that's a subject I would like to take up at some point, talking about soul retrieval. It's not what people think it is, but I've gone through parts of this process, and this goes into soul fragments, aspects of ourselves that require healing. That's why I've talked about aspect selves before, because there are parts of us that are spun off as their entities, just like Elise E talked about her alters.
Yeah.
You know, we spin off a part of consciousness that then takes a form, a thought form, an egregore, whatever you want to call it, and it becomes its own entity.
Yeah.
And the unification comes when we are able to begin reunifying these energies, not integrating them, but healing them so that they have the ability to develop to whatever level they are. There's all different forms and orders of life. And this is some of the esoteric stuff that doesn't get talked about a whole lot.
Right.
That, you know, it's not what we think it is. It's a very different kind of order of, you know, everything from our ancestors to the parts of ourselves that are the abandoned child, to all of the things that go into it. This isn't psychology. This is simply metaphysics on the order of personal healing. And yeah, it's a great conversation to have. I'd love to expand this sometime.
Yeah. Well, Mary, may I really quickly?
Yeah.
Meredith has a past as a reverend, right? And she is. We have talked off recording about.
Well, we share that then.
Well, that's awesome. But Meredith, we had talked about what we wanted to like do with that sort of stuff, and Meredith has talked about being a doula, death doula, someone who helps people to the next stage, but it's almost like a metaphorical death doula, because there's this new world that's coming, and I didn't really resonate so much with death doula, but I was like, what about like rebirth doula? Because we have this person that and it's a rebirth process with yourself, but it's being born into the new context with the new understanding and the new energies, and really just understanding at a really deep soul level that like you are okay, it is okay, you are going to be okay, and even if it's not okay, you're okay, kind of deal.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and not in an ignorant, I'm okay, like I'll be fine. No, but just in a way that's like, oh, I can be going through hell, and no matter what happens, whether I can accept all outcomes, I have gone through them in my head. Like I have lived 1,000 lives. Yeah. But that's sort of it. So we're going to be working on some material for that coming 2023. Cool. But definitely would love to come on and talk about soul retrieval if you would have us, because we would. Oh
yeah, no, I definitely would. This is a subject that I think needs opened up a little bit more,
especially now.
Absolutely,
as well as like with now. Practical steps, like how not that like people, you know, obviously everybody should do what feels intuitive to them, but I think that there are things that I've learned that are helpful, like building an altar for your aspect selves, inner children, ancestors, whatever it is that you're doing like that month, say. But you know, it's interesting how we were talking about like, you know, that whole like idea of like the, you know, experiencing a trauma, and then there's an aspect of you that like fractures off. You talked about that, and I guess what comes up to share about that is that that's a part of you that is not with you once you keep moving in linear time. So that's like that's a part that is like running that same experience, and you are still connected to that, but it's like a part of your energy field is like missing. So, you know, you see a lot of people, most people out here with a Swiss cheese aura.
I was just gonna say holes all over their auras. Yes.
Well, that's a whole other thing too. I've said this before. I've spent time in public spaces watching auras. And there are people out there who have just horrible energy, as you said, incomplete, perforated, and some of them have none at all. And you're going, what the fuck is that? Well, that's the NPC complex. You know, that's a whole other conversation in itself.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting.
I would love to keep going with this, guys. I would really like to wrap this show up. What we're going to do here is, because we could go all night. Well, you could. Me, not so much. My voice will eventually give out completely. And I won't get a chance to say goodbye because I'll be like Kermit the Frog.
We can't have that.
No, don't want to do that. So what we want to do is say goodnight to all the good people over on the YouTube channel. I kind of watched the chat. Was unmoderated. It didn't need to be moderated because my audience takes care of their own.
That's right.
And I love you guys. So we'll back out of YouTube here, just like we do a normal show. You folks on the Zoom room, stay on. We'll open this up for a few minutes, and then everybody get a chance to chat if you want to, or you can exit out. Hell, it's getting late, for some of us, and for some of us, it's not too late yet. But this has been, as always, super fun to have you guys on. Meredith, I had you on before. Amy, it was great to finally get you on to talk. Give people your information on where they can find you.
You can find me at She's Amy D on Instagram, at Take the Gold Pill on Instagram, or at Prima Donnas of the Gutter podcast on Instagram.
Cool. All right. So let's see if I can do the 2-finger swipe here and get the cues lined up, and we'll exit out of here for YouTube. And I'll look forward to talking to you folks on the other side of this as soon as I can find my freaking button. I need a producer.
We're rooting for you.
I swear to God, next year I get somebody technically better than I am.
Wow. They would have to be amazing.
Yeah, that's possible.
Anyway, we're out of here.
All right. You guys, I got to go make dinner and stuff. Thank you so much for having me on. It was such a lovely conversation. And please come back on Gold Pill, literally any and every time. You're invited to every episode. You're one of my favorite people in the entire world. It's been very parasocial. Sorry.
Awesome.
Okay. You guys have a great night.
This is Off Planet Radio.
There, formally, we got the outro out of the way. And let's see how I can. Yes, YouTube, you're looking at the host right now, scoring at a screen, trying to find how to end the stream. It's fun, isn't it? Here we go. Okay, we're off air on YouTube.